Well, we're going to continue a discussion we've been having that started in the Old Testament as the sons of God coming into the daughters of men and creating a race that God had to curse because it was a genetic hybrid which God could not receive. It was not part of his plan. And from that time until this, there has been a battle, and that battle comes to us in Genesis 3:15, in which there is a contest to see which seed dominates. Will it be the seed of the serpent or the seed of the woman? It's a genetic process, right? L.A. Marzulli, you've written about Nephilim. The Nephilim in the Old Testament, the fallen ones, they were a mixture. They were something God didn't approve of, and they started I guess you could say they started a ball rolling that's still rolling today.
Yeah, what we're looking at is this cosmic struggle, this cosmic chess match between the Most High God and the fallen angel. And of course it's a mismatch. The fallen angel, Lucifer, Satan, is no match for the Most High God. But he's so demented and so depraved that he actually thinks he can win. And then, of course, when you fast forward to the book of Revelation, when he gathers the kings of the earth and assembles them, they're looking up. They're ready to do battle. They really think they can win this war. And so what we see is a series of moves, counter moves, moves, counter moves, all through the Old and New Testament, where the fallen one is always trying to somehow get the upper hand and become the victor. Had he contaminated the entire human race, let's say Noah that would have been it. He would have won the chess match, and humans, if you could call them humans, because they would have all been demonic hybrids at that point, there would be no human race, and there would be no Messiah. He would have won the chess match to redeem. But thank God he didn't. And of course we have the flood, which wiped out the Nephilim and all the other chimeras that were there, and the bloodline continued to the Messiah.
Last time in our discussion, we had reached the point that we were talking seriously about genetic hybrids in the period of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We talked about the giants. We also began to speak of the latter-day phenomenon, Tom, in which this whole business of genetic manipulation would begin again in earnest, and our Lord prophesied that this would happen. He said it was just going to be like it was in the days of Noah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, it's kind of almost a two-part issue. There is what happened in ancient days, there's what's happening today. In a very general sense, you had a power that came down to the earth, and it seemed to immediately set about trying to build an empire. It had a plan, it had a system, and the goal of this empire was to subjugate all other living species upon the earth. Immediately, these Nephilim, of course, come under judgment from God. That alone, by the way, I think also attests to the facts about genetic manipulation, because otherwise you have a God who is depicted in the Scripture as forgiving, loving, not willing that any should perish. Even with the Hebrews, made provisions for non-Hebrew blood to be able to come in and to become a proselyte, to be, to get saved in the Old Testament sense. Always made provision, but when it came to the Nephilim, no grace whatsoever. If they were found, they were to be destroyed. They were to be wiped out. They were an aberration upon the earth. And so to me, even that fact says something about this unusual form of life. Now, will the same thing return? In that last show, we were talking about alien abduction. There seems to continue to be some very mysterious process that is at work, and it is harvesting DNA for some purpose.
Well, and the interesting thing today is that the same group of offenders from on high, if you will, they're back, but this time they're wearing a new disguise. They are disguised as sci-fi types. We come here to serve you. We come from another galaxy. We are superior to you. We've had longer to evolve than you have. We can bring you great technology. We can bring you all kinds of peace where you now have just internal conflict. We can bring peace to you. We can do all kinds of things. We can help you keep your planet green. So they're coming as our divine overseers, and actually I think being received that way by some groups.
Well, being received that way now in ways that are frankly surprising. For instance, how the Vatican has weighed in on this issue in recent years. And we in the last show we just mentioned this official disclosure series, which you're now making available through Prophecy in the News, 20 hours of audio recording. That grew out of this last January when the Royal Academy of Sciences, the oldest scientific body on Earth, out of the UK, invited members of NASA, the United Nations, the European Space Agency, people who are brilliant thinkers. They call them a dizzying array of intellects, is how the press referred to it, to come and to discuss one subject. Are we alone in the universe? And actually, can we make contact? Well, when the Vatican weighed in on this, my mind goes back to Galileo and people who were persecuted for scientific inquiry.
Yes.
And now all of a sudden we're warming up to this idea that these beings may not only exist, but, Lynn, they might even be morally superior to us.
I would certainly agree with that, that when they come, we will look at them. It's what I call, in a pen, the coming great deception, the alien gospel. And this alien gospel is that we were your progenitors. We manipulated and created all life genetically on planet Earth. We were responsible for the Earth's earliest civilizations. We genetically manipulated humans. We are the missing link in evolution, as it were. We set up the different religions throughout the globe. And your ancestors worshipped us as gods, and rightfully so. This critical juncture in human history, we are back to usher in this new age, this age of peace and love and brotherhood. One planet, one people, please.
So, are they coming from outer space?
Well, personally, I don't think they're coming from outer space. They may be coming from a parallel dimension. We live in, 4 dimensions. We used to say 3 dimensions. I almost repeated that from my grade school days. And now we know, of course, thanks to Einstein, that time is the 4th dimension, and is, of course, both manipulative, be manipulated and measured and changed based on our relationship to time. But in any case, scientists now, you've got all these people talking about quantum physics and what they call planes and parallel dimensions and string theory. And some of these are actually measurable, meaning that we're only doing it in terms of theory, but we're actually able to detect that there are dimensions that are around us that we simply can't see right now with our eyes. If we get to this, there is also another part of this. In what we're doing in biotechnology today, part of the transhumanist movement aspires to alter what we are by blending us with animals, which is what the Watchers did. But they also view that as possibly opening new modes of perception. Maybe then we'll be able to see in to these other realms. Like we know even from the Bible, the story of Balaam's donkey. The donkey can see this angel standing in the middle of the road. Balaam can't see this donkey. Nick Bostrom, who is one of the world's leading transhumanists, he's a professor, a bioethicist at Oxford University, has written extensively on this in his Transhumanist Values theses, which he earned his PhD on, how that by blending ourselves with animals, we're going to open new modes of perception because they can see into areas of the light spectrum that are closed to us.
Research has begun in this area. University of Utah is doing the farming of sheep in particular that have been altered slightly to produce human organs, say a human liver, a human heart, for transplantation. All sounds very good until you look at the implications of it. Now, back to the Vatican for a moment. They have their own astronomer. They have their own observatory. And they've been peering into the heavens. They've been listening to all the reports about UFOs, and they have concluded, their astronomer, Gabriel Funes, has said, we believe that at a certain point in the near future, these alien entities are going to reveal themselves to mankind. We should prepare ourselves for this because they will come as saviors, if you will, and he specifically said they may be vastly superior to us even morally because they may not have ever experienced original sin such as we did. Therefore, we should look to them as much above human potential.
Other priests among the Vatican, Corrado Balducci, some years ago, remember, Lynn, how much he was in the news because he said, and he was not repudiated by the Vatican when he said that aliens are already in contact with the earth. They're already communicating with us, and the Vatican, the highest levels of the Vatican, are aware of it. When Father Malachi Martin, remember, was asked by Art Bell, why, Gary, is the Vatican so heavily invested in the study of deep space, talking about that observatory.
Yes.
And he answered, because they know what is approaching us and that it could be of the utmost importance within the next 10 years. Well, that 10-year time frame elapsed about 24 months ago, and ironically, not just Corrado Balducci, but Guy Cosmonalgo comes out with his Intelligent Life in the Universe, published by a Vatican publishing house, talking about that very soon we may be in contact with our space brothers. They may be outside the sin question, and therefore...
And what's interesting is last week it was several UFOs over the Vatican that were filmed and recorded and posted. Is that just coincidence? I think what's happening, from my perspective, is that we're being set up for the coming great deception. I mean, when we read in the book of Revelation when it talks about in 2 Thessalonians this great one world religious system, it begs the question: how does one get 1.8 billion Muslims, 2.3 billion Christians to somehow change their paradigm, somehow change their worldview? We're looking, in my opinion, of some sort of an incident, something just so off the charts, unprecedented in all of history is about to happen. And what are we seeing? What are the signs all around us? The burgeoning UFO phenomena. They will come and they will say that we were, I'll reiterate it quickly, but it's basically the alien gospel. I can't say it enough. There are progenitors. They created all life on the planet, genetically manipulated human DNA to our present form. We're worshipped as gods. Now they're back at this critical juncture in human history. The Vatican, I believe, is setting the stage for the coming great deception. And it's not that it's almost here. I think it's here, which ties into what you were saying. They know, and they're trying to prepare the masses in some way.
Well, let's broaden this discussion just a little bit and just mention one word, and I'm sure that when I do, all of our viewers are going to just jump up and understand exactly what we're talking about. Roswell. Yeah. Everybody knows about Roswell. And the little guys, you know, the crashed flying saucer, these little bodies lying dead on the ground. I think every human being alive today has heard about Roswell. What happened there?
Well, that is the big question, I guess. Mogul balloons, Gary.
That's what the government says. Yeah, it was balloons.
Crash test dummies.
Crash test dummies.
Absolutely.
Crash test. Yeah, right. Those were a little too small for crash test dummies.
Yeah, well, we wanted to ask that question, too. That's why in this series, Official Disclosure, Prepare for Contact, we went back to the original civilian investigator, physicist, and we also went to Jesse Marcel's son, Jesse Marcel Jr., who even the government admits is the only person on Earth today, admits is a key phrase, handled the Roswell debris.
Now, the people on this production that you've put together, it's called Official Disclosure, Prepare for Contact. I believe that we're at the edge of something big, right?
Yeah, some of these believe that what happened in Roswell, for instance, Stanton Friedman, I mean, he goes to great lengths to argue that what happened in Roswell was a physical craft, potentially from another world. But the question for a person like me who believes that at the heart of it might have been something demonological, you just take the word poltergeist, a German word. Polter, spirit, geist, noisy.
Yeah.
How can a spirit manipulate matter? How can it touch and move matter? Well, in some way it can. It's easy for me to believe that all kinds of things could potentially have been manufactured. And in fact, doesn't the Bible even talk about celestial transportation devices, for want of a better term?
It does. Multidimensional transportation vehicles. And they're driven by the angels, if you will. One of the prophets of old, Elijah, showed his servant. You know, he said, Lord, open the eyes of my servant so that he can see these vehicles. And immediately the servant's eyes were opened, and presto, he saw the vehicles. And they were vehicles. They're called merkavim in the Hebrew. Chariot is the way it's translated in King James, but hey, a chariot doesn't fly through the heavens, not the kind we're thinking of. Now, gentlemen, back to the discussion. We've talked about Roswell. Let me ask the question I always ask about Roswell. These little creatures out here on the ground, assuming this is all true, they're dead. If those are spiritual creatures from the dark side, we might call them demons, can demons die? What's going on here?
Well, this is the second part of that question that we talked a little bit about in the first show and that I mentioned a moment ago. And that was, okay, we know from historical records that what the Watchers wanted to do, they wanted to leave their plane of existence. Peter both verify that. The story, of course, is told from Enoch, from whom they are quoting. Their motivation certainly could have been altogether or could have included the ambitious goal of cutting off the bloodline of the Messiah, contaminate the earth's population, so you cut off the bloodline of the Messiah, the human race is lost. When I first looked at this story, this ancient story, I could understand their motivation in that sense. But what I couldn't at first understand is why did they need to blend animals with humans? How would blending the DNA of various creatures facilitate their goal of wanting existence and enter into this reality? Mm-hmm. And one of the ancient texts, it's not a biblical, it's not in the Bible, it's not part of the canon, but it is quoted in two different places of the Old Testament, referred to, is an ancient text called the Book of Jasher. Mm-hmm. And Jasher tells the same story that Enoch does about the fall of the angels. And by the way, for the listening audience, many, many ancient records tell this story. But Jasher 4:18 says something unique in that it says that after the angels had revealed the secrets of heaven to mankind, that then, this is Jasher 4:18, then men began to teach the blending of animals of one species with another, therewith to provoke the Lord. One species with another. But this is literally an ancient record of advanced biotechnology. Mm-hmm. The crossing over of species barriers. In all the cultures of the old world, whether it's Etruscan or Greek or Roman or Egyptian, Babylonian, you find what are called chimeras, human-animal combinations like satyrs, the goat's hindquarters and a human being, a centaur, half horse, half man. And virtually all the gods of the Egyptians are human bodies with the heads of animals. The god of intelligence and writing, for example, has a man's body and the head of an ibis. So the artist was trying to express there some idea about what they considered to be gods. We would call these gods what the Old Testament refers to as Nephilim, giants. There were giants in the earth in those days. I think that's what we would call these creatures that the Egyptians were trying to portray, right?
And also afterwards.
And also afterwards.
Yeah. So this idea of mingling the species, which of course is forbidden, and we know that there's that the dividing line between the species. Each two, the Bible tells us, each in order of its own kind, reproducing. But what we see is the enemy, the fallen one, continues to try to advance this all through history. And now it really makes me wonder. I interviewed for the first book of Nephilim. This goes back 15 years ago, basically. I interviewed a guy at Amgen, American Genetics, and I asked him specifically, what kind of stuff are you doing? Now, this is a tech who doesn't have any security clearance. He can tell me what he's doing. He was taking the DNA of a firefly and putting the DNA of a firefly into a frog. Now, this is, again, 12, 15 years ago. The frog would eventually be born, and the frog would glow, light up like a firefly. That is off the charts. Now, that's back then with not an underground lab. Who knows what they're doing? And occasionally we get reports from underground bases, and these are colorful reports, apocryphal certainly. There's no way to vet them, but we get these stories of superhumans or bizarre-looking creatures. I mean, who knows what they're doing?
Well, in the old days, the fallen angels helped man, gave him little clues as to how to do this. Are they still giving man clues?
Yeah, I see, and I think that's what we're seeing paralleled in certain parts of biotechnology today is a repeat of an ancient forbidden science, crossing over species barriers. Even if you did not believe that the creation of human-animal chimeras, which we're doing in thousands of laboratories and we're funding by every major government in the world right now that's advanced enough to do it, even if you did not believe that that was a repeat of what the Watchers did, you would have to see it as an assault on God's creative genius. Absolutely. Why did God put boundaries around the species in order that each one can only reproduce after us? What does he know that we don't know? He could be protecting us. Biological nightmare, a Pandora's box, and Black Death.
You said a minute ago the Levitical laws are replete with commands by God not to create species, or species other than those he created.
Even to simulate it. If a man shall lie down with the beast, he shall be put to death. They couldn't, in that sense, just have sex and give offspring, but it was even simulating. Even the idea was such a spirit of Antichrist, such a Luciferian concept, that it was forbidden in the law. It couldn't even be simulated. Now, I asked the question a moment ago, though, how would that facilitate? And the short answer is that because God had created everything, only God, one thing the Watchers could not do, they could not speak, bara, and call forth out of nothingness raw atomic nuclear matter and command it to take a specific molecular form that then becomes a tree or a cow or a dog or a fish or a human or whatever. Only God could do that. What the Watchers could do, since they either participated with or observed creation, they could do what our scientists are doing today, and that is they could take the genetic material of one species and another and blend it to create a body. Why I think they did that was because once God had created all life, including humanity, he set it in motion. And he ordered each kind to reproduce after its own kind, meaning that when the sperm of a human meets the ovum of a human, at the first spark of life, the spirit of a human enters into this zygote. It's blocked. It's in order. In other words, it's not just a vacant, empty biological entity into which a spirit can take up residence. He set it in motion. They had to corrupt that. By blending animals with humans, they created a living biological entity that the spirit of a particular animal, or using the term spirit with animals is kind of problematic, but the nature is what I'm talking about. Of a dog wouldn't enter it because it wasn't a dog. Right. The spirit of a human wouldn't enter it for it wasn't a human. Now all of a sudden we have a living biological product into which these things could download themselves. And in a very brief explanation, essentially I came to believe that that's why they did what they did and how it facilitated their ability to leave their plane of existence. What's spooky about that, Len, is then when you open your books and start reading them, and you see how DNA, cattle mutilations, human mutilations, it's not only happening, it has exploded in recent years.
Yeah, it's just like Genesis 3:15 said, the battle is between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, which is a genetic contest, really, for genetic purity, I guess you could say. And rather than being aliens from outer space, as hoped for by the Vatican, we've got aliens from inner space with that specific goal to do anything they can to corrupt the human genome, right?
The first heaven is Earth. The second heaven, which I believe is this upper dimension, is where the fallen one resides. And he's able, right now anyway, to access our dimension through portals, which Tom obviously writes about. And at some point we know, again from Scripture, that the fallen will be cast out of the second heaven, and he comes to earth. And woe to the inhabitants of earth because the time is short. I think we're ramping up into those days. In my opinion, all the signs are here and manifesting.
Gary Stearman, wishing you a great